You want to do the holy kiss? No. Thought this morning we could think a little while about the subject of the importance of doubt, or the role of doubt in the Christian life and in Christian higher education. Peter Enns, E-N-N-S, a young Old Testament scholar, has written a very good book that I'd recommend to you. He wrote it basically for his students, called The Sin of Certainty. I agree with most everything Enns says in there, but I'd prefer to say essentially the same thing with a different title, namely that doubt can be an act of faith, or even more strongly, doubt is an act of faith. And the problem is, of course, our culture has, over the years and centuries, made the English word doubt the dualistic opposite of faith. And that is meaning in English, but it is not in Greek, in which the New Testament was written. The root meaning of the Greek word doubt, distasso, is really uncertainty, which is quite not the same as total disbelief. It's uncertainty either about an object, person, or about what course of action to take. So distasso is not disbelief, and we should quit translating it as doubt. I wrote a couple articles years ago that finally got translators not to translate a word in Matthew 19:28 as resurrection. Doesn't mean that at all. And I think we're going to have to do the same thing here, because they keep translating it as doubt as though it's the opposite of faith. And the Greek is just not that way. The New Testament writers use a completely different word than distasso. They use apistos. Pistos means faith. Apistos means a-faith. So it's like moral, amoral. This is not the word that they use for disbelief. So in the New Testament, doubt means to believe in God or Jesus, but not to understand totally the mystery of it all. It's to be uncertain. It's the kind of uncertainty that is the opposite of what Peter Enns calls the sin of certainty, knowing everything, of the need to know everything. It is, in that sense, a believing in God, but being uncertain about the mystery that doubt can and does impel us to a deeper Christian faith. Throughout Christian history, doubt as uncertainty and developing a stronger faith have actually gone hand in glove. Many Christians throughout the centuries, especially the mystics, have experienced and advocated this kind of doubt in conjunction with faith. The advocates of the importance of doubt in the life of faith are too numerous to cite here. You can find them in many books with a title such as the one I'm reading now by Bill Timaeus, entitled The Value of Doubt: Why Unanswered Questions Build Faith. But most importantly, the tandem of faith and doubt occurs in Scripture. The most intriguing one to me that I've been studying for several months now is at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. After Jesus has done all these marvelous deeds, healing people, walking on the water, giving the Sermon on the Mount, and so on, we come to the end of the Gospel when he's been dead. God has defeated death for him. He appears at a designated spot to his 11 disciples. And then it says this in Matthew 28:16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him. And then this translation says, but some doubted. How in the world could they doubt in the sense of not believing in Jesus at all after they've seen and heard all that he has done? Well, if we translate that word distasso there, not as doubt, but or at least uncertainty, is the way I've laid it out, we would translate it something like, they worshiped him and, not but, a contrast, they worshiped him and stood in awe of the mystery of his living presence. The word doubt here implies that they were not only in reverential awe about the object of their worship, the living Jesus, but also that they were uncertain about how to understand what had happened and about what they should do next. So let me give a few quick reasons for this translation. First of all, Matthew makes it clear that it's only the 11 disciples that are present for this. There's nobody else there. There's no 500 or anything else. That's elsewhere in the New Testament. Therefore, we don't have an easy out that most commentators take and say, well, it wasn't the disciples who doubted. It was these other folks. But that's to assume the wrong meaning of doubt, that it's the opposite of faith, that it's total disbelief in Jesus. Second, so it's the disciples who doubt. Second, doubt cannot mean that the disciples don't believe in Jesus at all in this passage, because their doubt, note, is coupled with worship of Jesus. And all through Matthew, this word for worship means reverential worship, falling on one's knees kind of worship. And, as I mentioned, it shouldn't be translated, but they doubted, but they worshiped and they doubted. So worship here clearly entails faith that's coupled with doubt for Matthew, not contrasted. And the translation again should be they worshiped and doubted, or better, they worshiped him with doubt. Surprisingly, neither Jesus nor the Matthean writer add any comment here about the disciples' doubt. Jesus lets their uncertainty stand right along with their faith, but he does take away their uncertainty about what to do. He tells them, go make disciples of all nations. They are to undertake this task of world evangelization with both faith and uncertainty. They're neither absolutely certain about why Jesus was dead but now is alive, nor are they certain about what will happen on their preaching mission. But the faith and doubt, uncertainty go together. Earlier in Matthew's story, in Matthew 14:31, Peter is trying to walk on the water. And Jesus does comment on Peter's doubt here, and he uses the same word, distasso. He couples it with having, he says, a small or weak faith. Here too, Peter has faith. The disciples all the way through Matthew have faith, but it's a small faith. Jesus wants it to grow large, like the Syrophoenician woman he deals with. So the role of doubt and uncertainty is to work with faith, as one Christian commentator put it, to fuel faith and help it develop. So the next verses, just like our passage then say in this chapter, that all the disciples in the boat, and including Peter, worship Jesus and make the correct statement of faith by saying, truly you are the Son of God. Here again, their doubt is an integral part of their faith development, just as it is in Matthew 28:17. So it's a certain kind of doubt. And note, only Matthew uses this word distasso in the whole New Testament. Nobody else uses it. It's particularly his view of this coupling of faith and doubt. This doubt is not unbelief, as in Mark 9:24, where the guy says, I believe, help my unbelief. It's a totally different word, apostia, of faith. So in summary, in Matthew 28:18, the disciples believe in Jesus and are in fact worshiping him, but they're overwhelmed by the incomprehensibility of the event as an act of God whose actions are beyond total human comprehension. The problem again is with our English word doubt, which is the opposite of belief. The problem is not in Greek. The Greek word means uncertainty, or, as Enns points out, the opposite of absolute certainty. And this is presented in Matthew as a positive thing for faith. In other words, the disciples are having a genuine religious experience of the sacred, much like Moses had at the burning bush, which is filled with uncertainty there. Nothing in the disciples' history or in the history of the Jews has prepared them for this experience. God is never expected to defeat death for an individual. Resurrection was thought of as only a general resurrection and to occur at the end of history, not in the midst of history. In addition, of course, there's no Jewish tradition that the Messiah would be killed and resurrected. This event that happened with Jesus shatters all of their expectations. This is what God does and what he still does. Shatters what we think we know in order to bring himself to us. He shatters the limitations of our knowledge, of what we are certain about. So they behold Jesus alive and realize that God has defeated death for him, a new thing in their history. They are in the presence of a powerful and overwhelming mystery that transcends complete human understanding. Simultaneously, in this kind of experience, they realize their humanity. They're humans, they're not God. They realize that God is the eternal source of all truth, and they're not. Doubt in this case is the realization that they are limited, human, and that there are some things that cannot be absolutized into a neat system of absolute certainty. As humans, we always live with partial knowledge of God. As Paul so nicely puts it in 1 Corinthians 13, now we know in part, but then fully. As Christians, we live between the times, now, but then. On the other hand, to say that God is beyond total human comprehension doesn't mean that we don't know anything. It just means that we don't have total comprehensive knowledge of God. So we don't have to slide into relativism or nihilism on the one hand and say that we can't know anything for certain. It's not an either or. Either I know everything about God or I know nothing. The twin evils to avoid are absolutism, the claim that we know all the truth with absolute and final certainty, and on the other hand, relativism, the claim that we can know nothing for sure and that one truth is just as good as any other. The history of higher education, Christian education, in the United States has seen colleges go in both directions. Many schools that started out as Christian colleges, including places like Harvard and Vanderbilt and many other places, finally reduced truth to only the secular realm and no longer claimed they were searching out truth that related to God in any sense. Other schools have reduced truth to the realm of faith, theology, and quite frankly, ideology, and have absolutized a certain version of the truth in which they simply indoctrinate their students. Sociologists of religion have shown that most people want certainty and even demand it. If you give them absolute certainty, you'll be successful. They'll reward you greatly. They'll fill up your trunk with $100 bills, and they will rush to colleges that dole out absolute certainty. AU has always felt the pressure to offer absolute certainty about the Bible, Christian faith, and theology. That's the way to recruit students. And many parents like that approach. But so far, AU has held its ground in teaching about the Bible, Christianity, and other things like biology. We know many things and teach them, but we don't claim to know everything with absolute certainty, and especially about God. AU has maintained its Christian stance by saying that God is the source of all truth. Therefore, the academic disciplines, biblical study, theology, biology, and so forth, deal with truth, and any truth they discover is theoretically God's truth. So there shouldn't be any conflict between what we find as truth in our academic disciplines and our faith in God as the source of all truth. What we find in one realm as truth should be in harmony with God as the totality of truth. But since academic disciplines are research disciplines, they're always finding new things. The totality of truth is never captured. This means, as Paul says, again, that we will never arrive at absolute certainty. We will always know partially until the end of history itself arrives. But to believe this means that we must be willing to revise whatever constructions of truth that we have because research is dynamic and on the move. It's like the dynamic faith that President Pistol constantly talks about. He's right. When provable truth is discovered, we Christians should modify our views of life and God accordingly. This has always been AU's view. This is what a dynamic Christian faith does. It's always changing, never allows absolutizing or totalitarianism anywhere along the way, yet it acts on the truth that it has at any given time. That's why the Christian life is called a journey of faith. This notion of truth is compatible with Christian faith in God as the source and the goal of all truth, and with the belief that by definition God is beyond total human comprehension. In that sense, we're always searching out the truth, and we're always limited as humans because we never arrive at total truth. The search for truth in the disciplines is the basis for research, and that's what research does. It leads to doubt and uncertainty. It says, here's what we understand about truth and reality at this point, but truth and reality, they say, seems to be endless. This continual search for God's truth is also what faith does, and in that sense, academics and faith are compatible. Albert Schweitzer, the great medical missionary from the 50s, put it this way very nicely. He says, as we acquire more knowledge, and Schweitzer had a lot of knowledge, doctorates in music, expert in Bach, medical doctor, doctor of philosophy, doctor of theology. He had a lot of knowledge. But he says, as we acquire more knowledge, things do not become more comprehensible, but more mysterious. That's it in a nutshell. Doubt, in the New Testament sense, is an actualization of faith as the continual realization that we're not God. We're limited, we're human, and that any system of knowledge that we build is partial. But can we live with a diversity of views and ambiguity? Can we live without absolute certainty? Yes, because another great affirmation of the Christian faith is that God is the final and the only judge. This means that it's not our job to sort out all of the diversity, even the diversity within Christianity. That's God's job. And the biblical promise is that God is faithful and trustworthy, and He will sort it all out. He'll do that. What a weight off our shoulders. Took me a long time to realize that. I knew everything. Took me about age 35 to realize, no, I don't. And that's okay. It takes time. As long as we're in this existence, diversity and ambiguity and uncertainty will continue. Our task is simply to live out what we claim to know and depend on God to finally sort it all out with justice and equity. And He will. God is the only judge. It also means we don't have to try and live by somebody else's absolutized system of truth. That's why Paul says in Corinthians that he will not be judged by, in a final sense, by anybody. Absolutizing in religion not only produces the arrogance for Christians to think that they can know as much as God does and can sort everything out, it can and does fall into the trap, as Enns says, of the sin of certainty, or what Paul literally, his synonyms for sin are arrogance and boasting. Stick with your own truth and your own particular situation and live it out. If you accept what I or anyone else says, you're simply accepting another human system. And, good though it may be, it's not necessarily God's truth. For example, everything I've said up to this point could be wrong. Share your knowledge with others, and they with you. But don't impose it on others, and don't let them impose theirs on you. That's what it means to be a seeker for the truth, or the famous phrase, it's faith, seeking understanding. And by the way, this is Church of God tradition, and it's been undergirded here at AU. Develop your own understanding of faith based on your experience with God and share it with those who are doing the same thing. It's okay to disagree and be uncertain about some things. This has been the university's stance as well. After all, for goodness sake, we're in Adam W. Miller Chapel. who championed precisely the view I'm outlining. With this model, AU is unique. You don't have to sign any doctrinal statements to come here, nor I to teach. It's based on your experience and growth in that Christian experience. There's no one model that contains all the absolute truth about life or God, but we do know things, and there are many things we can prove about the Bible and Christian history. But full absolute certainty is an eschatological notion. We have only partial and temporary knowledge now. The Christian will need to reconcile the life of the mind then with the life of faith in one way or another. And the temptation again will be either to absolutize our knowledge and become functionally as God himself, who knows everything, or to slide into relativism or nihilism. Faith and doubt do not have to be seen as incompatible either or. They are both and dynamically on the move toward God's final resolution. In the final analysis, we live, move, and have our being in the realization that God and life itself is a wonderful mystery. I could multiply quotations from Christians and not just scholars that doubt is essential to faith, but you can search out those quotations. But it's a certain kind of doubt that is both compatible with and essential to faith, namely the realization that God is beyond total human comprehension. Faith and doubt are inseparable and necessary to each other, like the Chinese philosophy of yin and yang, female and male. Both are absolutely necessary to live a harmonious life, opposite what we perceive as opposite forces. But this is not an antagonistic dualism of yin against yang trying to destroy it. It's a necessary, complementary dualism. Both are necessary and a balance is necessary. Same thing applies to faith and doubt as uncertainty. And I remind you as a footnote, early Christianity began as an Eastern religion. That's Eastern thought, not as a Western religion. So faith and doubt can be seen in this sense like yin and yang. They're both necessary and need to be kept in harmony. So our task is to make the faith-doubt tandem concrete by our acts of living so that there's no gulf between faith and doubt. The journey of education and of faith for both the teacher and the student is best to travel with flexibility and agility rather than rigidity and absolute certainty. The very nature of a dynamic faith and a liberating pedagogy begins with acknowledging uncertainty, curiosity, and doubt that is committed to a joint journey of discovery and a deepening of faith for us all. To put a real practical point on it, don't beat yourself up when you have questions, and particularly when you don't get the answers. As they said in the title of the book, sometimes unanswered questions are what really deepen one's faith. Let's stand with a short closing prayer then. Lord, help us to let go of a faith that needs to know everything, and give us a faith that is trust in you regardless of our degree of knowledge and absolute knowledge. Trust in you is the realization that you are the final source of truth, and you will be faithful. You will not let us down. Go with us over spring break. Help us all to stay well and to keep growing in life with you. We ask in your name. Amen.